The morning sun filtered through the traditional paper windows of the Kim family's home in Seoul as Jisoo stood before her parents in their living room. Her father sat rigidly on the floor cushion, his business suit perfectly pressed, while her mother knelt beside him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The air felt thick with tension as Jisoo revealed her decision to pursue art instead of the business degree they had planned for her. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. I've been accepted to the Seoul Arts Institute, Jisoo announced, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Her father's face hardened, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening into crevices of disappointment. Her mother's sharp intake of breath cut through the silence. "Absolutely not," Mr. Kim declared, his voice carrying the weight of years of expectations. "We did not invest in your education for you to waste your life on paintings." He stood up, towering over Jisoo, his shadow stretching across the polished wooden floor. The family photos on the wall seemed to watch the scene unfold, memories of happier times now witnesses to this fracture. Mrs. Kim reached for her husband's sleeve but remained silent, her eyes avoiding Jisoo's pleading gaze. The family's housekeeper hurried past the doorway, pretending not to hear the rising voices. Outside, the busy streets of Seoul continued their usual rhythm, unaware of the drama unfolding within these walls. "You have until tonight to change your mind," Mr. Kim announced, his tone final. "Otherwise, you are no longer welcome in this house." He turned his back, a gesture that spoke volumes in Korean culture. Jisoo's mother remained kneeling, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. That evening, Jisoo found herself on the streets of Seoul, a single suitcase containing her most precious possessions, her sketchbooks, a few changes of clothes, and the savings she'd managed to accumulate from part-time jobs. The neon signs above her blurred through her tears as she wandered through the bustling Hongdae district. Street artists populated every corner, their performances and artwork creating a vibrant tapestry of creative expression. A young man spray-painted a massive dragon on a designated wall, while another created portraits for tourists. The energy was electric, yet Jisoo felt disconnected from it all, aware of her new reality as just another displaced dreamer in the big city. She found temporary shelter in a small gazawan, a tiny room barely big enough for a bed and desk. The shared bathroom and kitchen seemed like luxury compared to the possibility of homelessness. Through online searches and countless rejections, Jisoo finally secured an entry-level position at the Modern Edge Gallery in Gangnam. The gallery's pristine white walls and polished concrete floors intimidated Jisoo on her first day. Her colleagues, mostly art school graduates from prestigious universities, spoke in sophisticated terms about contemporary art movements and famous artists. Jisoo understood the concepts but felt like an imposter, her lack of formal education weighing heavily on her confidence. Min-ji, another gallery assistant, took notice of Jisoo's isolation during lunch breaks. "Your arrangement of the new sculpture exhibition was impressive," she offered, sitting beside Jisoo in the staff room. "Where did you study?" The question made Jisoo's stomach clench. "I'm self-taught," she admitted, preparing for the usual dismissive response. Instead, Min-ji's eyes widened with interest. "That's actually amazing," Min-ji said, pulling out her phone to show Jisoo some of her own photography work. "Most of us are so caught up in theory that we forget art is about raw talent and passion." Despite this small victory, Jisoo still struggled with her role. She watched visitors discuss artwork worth more than she would earn in years, their casual conversations about purchases, making her acutely aware of the social divide. During quiet moments, she would sketch in her notebook, hiding her work whenever someone approached. The gallery's senior curator, Mr. Park, caught her sketching one evening after closing. Instead of scolding her, he paused to examine her work. His silence, as he flipped through the pages, made Jisoo's heart race. Finally, he closed the sketchbook and returned it without comment, leaving Jisoo uncertain whether his silence was approval or condemnation. The first month that the gallery tested Jisoo's resolve daily. She learned to navigate the complex social dynamics, to speak confidently about artists she had only recently researched, and to maintain her composure when dealing with demanding clients. Each night, She returned to her tiny room, exhausted but determined to prove her worth in this new world she had chosen. This initial period of adjustment set the stage for what would become a transformative journey, though Jisoo couldn't yet see past her immediate struggles. The streets of Seoul, once familiar and comforting, now seemed filled with both possibility and peril, much like the blank canvases she dreamed of filling with her own artistic vision. The Modern Edge Gallery hummed with activity during its most prestigious reception of the season. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the artwork as Seoul's elite mingled among the installations. Jisoo moved efficiently through the crowd, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, when the gallery's atmosphere shifted noticeably. The crowd parted as Park Miho entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. Miho carried himself with natural authority, his tailored suit suggesting success, without ostentation. Unlike other wealthy patrons who treated gallery staff as invisible, he acknowledged each person he passed with a genuine smile. Jisoo observed him from her position near the refreshment table, noting how he stopped at each artwork, taking time to study the pieces rather than merely glancing at them as others did. "That's Park Miho," Minji whispered to Jisoo during a quiet moment. "He's the CEO of Summit Technologies, but he's known more for his contributions to the arts than his business success." She straightened her uniform as Miho approached their section. "They say he's transformed several struggling artists' careers with his patronage." Jisoo watched as Miho engaged with a group of emerging artists displaying their work. His questions demonstrated genuine knowledge of technique and art history, surprising the artists who had expected superficial business talk. He spoke about brushstrokes and color theory with the same confidence he presumably used in corporate boardrooms. During his conversation with a particularly nervous young sculptor, Miho's laugh carried across the room, warm and unrestrained, contrasting sharply with the polite titters of other patrons. The sculptor's tension visibly melted as Miho shared an anecdote about his own first art purchase, a story that made the entire group smile. Jisoo found herself gravitating toward their conversations while maintaining her professional duties. She noticed how Miho's eyes lit up when discussing experimental techniques, how he encouraged artists to explain their creative processes. Unlike other wealthy patrons who treated art purely as investment, Miho spoke about emotional connection and cultural impact. The evening progressed, and Jisoo remained busy with her tasks, feeling increasingly invisible among the glamorous crowd. She cleared abandoned glasses and adjusted lighting as needed, all while trying to suppress her own artistic aspirations that seemed to surface stronger than ever in this environment. Near the end of the reception, as the crowd thinned, Jisoo was replacing a fallen painting hook when she felt someone watching her. She turned to find Miho standing nearby, examining the abstract piece she had just readjusted. "You have a good eye," he said, surprising her with his direct address. "The angle you chose gives the piece better dimensionality." His observation was specific and technical, showing he had been paying attention to her work. Jisoo struggled to maintain her professional composure. "Thank you, Mr. Park." The artist emphasized the importance of lighting and perspective in displaying this series. She spoke softly but clearly, drawing on her knowledge rather than retreating into shyness. "I noticed you earlier," he continued, turning to face her fully. "You were sketching during your break. May I?" He gestured to the small notebook partially visible in her apron pocket. The request wasn't demanding, but rather genuinely interested. With slightly trembling hands, Jisoo withdrew her notebook. Miho handled it carefully, taking time to study each page. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed engagement with each sketch. After several minutes, he looked up at her with newfound interest. "These are remarkable," he said, returning the notebook. "Particularly your use of negative space. It's sophisticated for someone without formal training." At Jisoo's surprised look, he added, "Mr. Park mentioned you were self-taught." Before Jisoo could respond, Miho reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card. "The gallery is planning a showcase of emerging artists next month. You should submit your work." He held up a hand as she began to protest. "Not as a favor, but because your perspective deserves to be seen. Raw talent combined with technical skill is rare." The conversation was interrupted by the gallery director calling for Miho's attention. As he turned to leave, he added, "Think about it, MS?" "Kim Jisoo," she supplied. "Ms. Kim, art isn't about credentials, it's about vision. And you clearly have that." With a final encouraging smile, he rejoined the remaining guests, leaving Jisoo holding his business card and feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as Jisoo processed the interaction. She watched Miho bid farewell to the gallery staff, noting how he remembered each person's name. Even as he left, his presence lingered in the space, much like the way certain paintings continued to affect viewers long after they'd looked away. The following days at the gallery felt different for Jisoo as she wrestled with Miho's unexpected offer. During her lunch break, she sat with Minji in the staff room, turning Miho's business card over in her hands while her friend offered enthusiastic encouragement. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime," Minji insisted, pushing aside her half-eaten lunch. "Do you know how many artists would give anything for Park Miho to notice their work? He launched Young Hae-won's career last year, and now her pieces sell for millions of won." Jisoo stared at her sketchbook, doubt clouding her thoughts. "My work isn't ready. These are just sketches, experiments. I haven't even completed a proper collection." Her fingers traced the edges of a recent drawing, seeing only its flaws and unfinished elements. Later that week, Miho returned to the gallery for a business meeting. Jisoo was arranging a new installation when he approached her, his usual confident demeanor somewhat subdued. He waited until she finished securing a sculpture before speaking. "Have you considered my offer, Miss Kim?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes showing genuine interest. When Jisoo hesitated, he gestured toward a quiet corner of the gallery. "Walk with me for a moment." As they moved through the space, Miho surprised her by sharing his own story. "My father wanted me to focus solely on expanding our technology empire," he explained, stopping before a large abstract painting. "Art was considered a distraction, a waste of resources. When I started investing in galleries and supporting artists, he threatened to remove me from the company's succession plan."
Yeah.
Sue looked at him with new understanding. "What did you do?" "I proved that art and business aren't mutually exclusive. Our company's creative initiatives, inspired by collaborations with artists, have led to some of our most innovative products." He turned to face her directly. "But it wasn't easy. Every day, I face board members who question my decisions, family members who think I'm squandering our legacy." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Miho's business associates, but before leaving, he added, "Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't other people's doubt, it's our own." Over the next few weeks, Jisoo and Miho developed an unexpected friendship. Their conversations, though brief, always left Jisoo with new perspectives on both art and life. During one memorable evening, as they discussed a new exhibition installation, Miho confided his struggles with maintaining authenticity in the corporate world. "Everyone expects the CEO to be infallible," he admitted, helping her adjust the lighting for sculpture. "But true leadership means acknowledging vulnerability, just as genuine art requires emotional honesty." Jisoo found herself sharing more of her own struggles, the lonely nights in her tiny room, the weight of her family's disapproval, the constant battle between practical needs and artistic dreams. Miho listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights from his own experience. Their friendship drew attention within the gallery. Some staff members whispered about favoritism, while others, like Minji, celebrated Jisoo's growing confidence. Mr. Park, the senior curator, watched their interactions with thoughtful interest, occasionally nodding in approval when Miho sought Jisoo's opinion on new acquisitions. During one late-night installation session, Miho revealed more about his family's pressure. "They want me to marry someone from a suitable corporate family, take a more conventional path," he said, helping Jisoo move a heavy frame. "But I've seen how that path worked for my older brother, successful on paper, miserable in reality." Jisoo understood the weight of family expectations all too well. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice," she admitted. "If disappointing them was worth pursuing something so uncertain." "Art isn't uncertain," Miho responded, his voice firm. "It's the most certain thing there is. It's truth expressed through creation." The uncertainty comes from the market, from others' opinions, but never from the art itself. These conversations strengthen their connection, creating a safe space where both could express their doubts and aspirations. Miho's presence in the gallery became more frequent, though he maintained professional boundaries, never letting their friendship compromise Jisoo's position or reputation. As the date for the Emerging Artists Showcase approached, their discussions increasingly focused on Jisoo's potential participation. Each conversation pushed her closer to taking the risk, though her insecurities still fought against her ambitions. The atmosphere in the gallery shifted noticeably when Seoyeon, one of Seoul's most celebrated contemporary artists, arrived for her upcoming exhibition planning. Her presence commanded attention, but unlike Miho's warmth, Seoyeon's aura radiated cold authority. She swept through the gallery in designer clothes, her assistant trailing behind with a tablet, meticulously documenting every comment and criticism. Seoyeon first noticed Jisoo during a preliminary layout discussion. Jisoo was quietly arranging a series of smaller pieces when Seoyeon's sharp voice cut through the room. "Who authorized this arrangement?" she demanded, gesturing at the wall Jisoo had been working on. The gallery fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Mr. Park stepped forward, explaining that Jisoo had been following the agreed-upon layout, but Seoyeon dismissed his defense with a wave of her hand. "It's completely wrong. The spa. Singh disrupts the visual flow I specifically requested." Her criticism, though professional in words, carried an undercurrent of disdain. The situation worsened when rumors began circulating about Jisoo's potential participation in the Emerging Artists Showcase. Seoyeon, who served on the selection committee, made her disapproval clear during a staff meeting. "We need to maintain certain standards," she announced, her eyes fixed pointedly on Jisoo. "The gallery's reputation depends on proper credentials and established techniques." The sabotage began subtly. Jisoo's carefully arranged displays would be found altered overnight, forcing her to redo hours of work. Documents containing her exhibition proposals disappeared from the shared drive. Her name was mysteriously omitted from important email chains regarding the showcase. During a crucial portfolio review session, Seoyeon orchestrated her most calculated move. As senior committee member, she spoke last after other reviewers had praised Jisoo's unique perspective. "The work is derivative," Seoyeon declared, her voice carrying across the conference room. "I see attempts to copy established artists without understanding fundamental principles. It's the kind of superficial imitation we often see from amateurs." The words struck Jisoo like physical blows, each criticism targeting her deepest insecurities. She maintained her composure, but her hands trembled as she gathered her portfolio. The other committee members shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to challenge Seoyeon's authority. Whispers spread through Seoul's art community. Seoyeon's influence ran deep, and soon Jisoo found herself increasingly isolated at industry events. Gallery visitors who had previously engaged with her about artwork now passed by without acknowledgement. The situation reached a critical point during a major client presentation. Miho attended as a potential buyer, and Seoyeon was showcasing her latest series. When Miho asked for Jisoo's opinion on a particular piece, Seoyeon interjected before she could respond. "Perhaps we should consult someone with proper artistic training," she suggested smoothly. "Experience does matter in these evaluations." Miho's response surprised everyone. He turned to face Seoyeon directly, his usual diplomatic demeanor replaced with steel. "In my experience, Ms. Kim's insights have consistently demonstrated both technical understanding and innovative thinking. Her perspective is precisely what this gallery needs." The confrontation created an immediate tension. Seoyeon's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of genuine anger. "Mr. Park," she said tightly, "I wasn't aware the gallery was now prioritizing untrained opinions over professional expertise." Miho stood his ground. "Art's value isn't determined by credentials, Ms. Seoyeon. It's determined by its ability to move, to challenge, to inspire. Something Ms. Kim understands deeply." His defense, though professional, left no doubt about his position. The exchange reverberated through the gallery's hierarchy. While some staff members began quietly showing support for Jisoo, others aligned more firmly with Seoyeon, creating a subtle but palpable divide. Mr. Park found himself navigating an increasingly complex situation, trying to maintain harmony while protecting both the gallery's interests and Jisoo's position. The autumn air turned crisp as Seoul entered its most photogenic season. Jisoo was arranging a new window display when she spotted Miho across the street at a trendy cafe. He wasn't alone. A striking woman sat across from him, her elegant posture and designer outfit marking her as someone from his social circle. Their body language spoke of familiarity, Miho leaning forward, laughing at something she said, while she gracefully touched his arm during their conversation. Later that day, Minji provided the context Jisoo hadn't asked for, but desperately wanted to know. "That's Jae. Ian," she explained during their lunch break. "She's the daughter of Samsung's vice president. She and Miho dated for 3 years during university. Everyone thought they would get married until she suddenly left for France to pursue fashion design." The information settled uncomfortably in Jisoo's stomach. She recalled Miho's recent distraction during their conversations, the way he'd check his phone more frequently, how he'd sometimes trail off mid-sentence as if his thoughts were elsewhere. The pieces began fitting together with painful clarity. Over the next few weeks, Jiyeon became a regular presence at gallery events. She moved through the space with practiced ease, her perfect Korean mixing with fluent French as she discussed art movements with patrons. Her presence commanded attention much like Miho's did, but while his charisma was warm and inclusive, hers carried an air of exclusive sophistication. During one evening event, Jisoo overheard Jiyeon and Miho speaking in quiet tones near a secluded corner of the gallery. "You haven't changed," Jiyeon said, her voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "Still trying to save the world one artist at a time." The fondness in her voice made Jisoo's chest tighten. Miho's response was too quiet to hear, but their shared laughter echoed through the space. Jisoo focused intently on adjusting a spotlight that didn't need adjusting, trying to ignore the intimate scene playing out behind her. When she finally turned around, she caught Jiyeon studying her with calculating interest. The dynamic shifted subtly, but noticeably. Miho's visits to the gallery became less frequent, and when he did come, Jiyeon often appeared shortly after. Their shared history was evident in small gestures, inside jokes, finishing each other's sentences, referencing past experiences with casual familiarity. Jisoo withdrew into her work, maintaining professional courtesy, but stepping back from the friendly conversations she and Miho used to share. When he asked about her progress on pieces for the showcase, her responses became brief and non-committal. She constructed careful barriers of politeness, protecting herself from hopes she now saw as foolish. One rainy evening, as Jisoo was closing up the gallery alone, Miho appeared unexpectedly. "You've been avoiding me," he said directly, his voice carrying concern. "Is everything all right?" Jisoo maintained her focus on the security panel, inputting the code with deliberate precision. "I've been busy preparing for the showcase," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And you seem occupied with personal matters. I wouldn't want to impose." Miho stepped closer, his reflection visible in the darkened windows. "Jisoo," he started, then paused as if choosing his words carefully. "Things aren't always what they appear to be." Before he could continue, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jiyeon's name illuminated the screen. The moment shattered like fine crystal dropping on marble floors. Jisoo managed a polite smile. "You should answer that. Good night, Mr. Park." She left him standing in the gallery, the distance between them growing with each step she took toward the exit. The rain outside matched her mood, and she allowed herself to blend into the crowd of umbrellas and rushing figures, becoming just another anonymous soul in Seoul's endless sea of people. The preparation for the upcoming showcase consumed Jisoo's days and nights. Her tiny Gazawan room transformed into a makeshift studio, with canvases propped against every available surface. Paint stains marked the floor despite her careful placement of drop cloths, and the air perpetually carried the sharp scent of oils and turpentine. During these long hours of solitude, Jisoo poured her complicated emotions into her work. Each brushstroke carried the weight of her family's rejection. Every color choice reflected the complexity of her feelings about Miho and the compositions themselves. spoke of her struggle to find belonging in Seoul's competitive art world. She worked with an intensity that surprised even herself, often losing track of time until the first rays of dawn filtered through her small window. The constant criticism from Seoyeon began to seep into her consciousness, making her question every artistic decision. She would complete a piece, only to start over the next day, convinced it wasn't good enough. The growing pile of discarded canvases in the corner of her room stood as a testament to her inner turmoil. At the gallery, Seoyeon's influence continued to cast a shadow over Jisoo's professional life. During a preview of upcoming exhibitions, Seoyeon made a point of examining Jisoo's workspace, her perfectly manicured nails trailing along the desk as she commented loudly about the importance of proper artistic education. Some skills, she announced to the gathered staff, simply cannot be acquired through mere enthusiasm. The pressure mounted as the showcase deadline approached. Jisoo's hands began to shake when she painted, and she caught herself making basic mistakes in her gallery duties. She mixed up shipping labels, misplaced important documents, and once nearly dropped a valuable sculpture while attempting to move it. Each error seemed to confirm Seoyeon's assessment of her inadequacy. One particularly difficult evening, after everyone else had left, Jisoo sat alone in the gallery's storage room, surrounded by half-finished paintings. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her work, making every flaw seem magnified. The weight of her ambitions pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. It was in this moment of despair that Miho found her. He stood in the doorway silently for a moment, taking in the scene before him. Without saying a word, he pulled up a chair and sat beside her, his presence both comforting and complicated given recent events. "Tell me what you see when you look at these," he said finally, gesturing to her paintings. Jisoo stared at her work through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Mistakes. Inadequacy. Proof that everyone else is right about me." Miho shook his head slowly. "I see courage," he responded, his voice gentle but firm. "I see someone who had every reason to give up, but chose to keep fighting. These aren't just paintings, Jisoo. They're battle scars, victories, moments of truth." He stood up and walked to one of her canvases, a particularly emotional piece depicting a solitary figure surrounded by swirling shadows and light. "This is real art," he continued. "Not the sanitized, committee-approved work that sells for millions, but says nothing. This speaks to anyone who's ever felt lost, scared, or alone." His words penetrated the wall of doubt she'd built around herself. For the first time in weeks, Jisoo looked at her work through different eyes. She saw beyond the technical flaws to the raw emotion beneath, the authentic voice she'd been trying to silence in her quest for perfection. "The showcase isn't about proving yourself to Seoyeon or anyone else," Miho added, turning back to face her. "It's about being brave enough to show the world who you really are." He paused, then added softly, "And from where I stand, that person is extraordinary." The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings and complicated by recent events. But something had shifted in Jisoo's perspective. She stood up, wiped her eyes, and began gathering her paintings with renewed purpose. Each piece now felt like a chapter in her story, imperfect but genuine. The final weeks before the showcase brought a frenetic energy to the gallery. Amid the usual bustle of preparations, Jisoo and Miho found themselves working closely together, their professional relationship complicated by unspoken emotions and Ji-yeon's continued presence in their orbit. During a late evening of exhibition planning, Miho and Jisoo worked alone in the gallery's main space, arranging preliminary layouts for the upcoming show. The city lights filtered through the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor as they moved pieces into position. Their hands brushed accidentally as they adjusted a large canvas, causing both to pause momentarily. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. "The lighting needs to be adjusted here," Miho said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. He reached above Jisoo to angle a spotlight, standing close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne. For a moment, neither moved, caught in the gravity of their proximity. The spell broke when Miho's phone chimed with a message. Ji-yeon's name flashed across the screen, and reality crashed back into the moment. Miho stepped away, checking the message with a frown that deepened as he read. Later that week, Ji-yeon made her move during a private gallery event. She approached Miho while he was examining one of Jisoo's preliminary pieces, sliding her arm through his with practiced ease. "Remember that gallery in Paris?" she asked, her voice carrying across the room. "The one where we talked about our future?" Jisoo, arranging refreshments nearby, couldn't help but overhear their conversation. Ji-yeon spoke of shared memories, inside jokes, and plans once made. Her words painted a picture of a past that seemed to reach forward into the present, threatening to reshape the future. Miho's responses were polite but guarded, his body language tense. When Ji-yeon mentioned a dinner invitation from her father to discuss old times and new possibilities, Miho's eyes flickered briefly to Jisoo before he offered a non-committal response. The situation reached a breaking point during a showcase planning meeting. Ji-yeon had somehow secured a position on the advisory committee, citing her international gallery experience. As she reviewed the exhibition layout, her suggestions consistently aimed to minimize the impact of Jisoo's work. Perhaps these pieces would be better suited for the secondary gallery space, Ji-yeon suggested smoothly, indicating Jisoo's main installation. "We wouldn't want to overwhelm visitors with untested artists." Miho began to object, but Jisoo spoke first. "Thank you for your input," she said quietly, gathering her materials. "I'll reconsider my participation in the showcase." The words tasted like defeat as she spoke them. She left the meeting room quickly, ignoring Miho's attempt to follow. In the relative safety of the storage room, Jisoo allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, her hands shaking as she organized her supplies. She had been naive to think she could compete in this world, with its complex social hierarchies and long-established relationships. Miho found her there, his expression troubled. "Vit, you can't give up now. Your work deserves to be seen." "Some battles aren't worth fighting," she responded, not meeting his eyes. "You have your world, Mr. Park, and I have mine." I was foolish to think they could intersect. The formal use of his name created a palpable barrier between them. Miho stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but Jisoo moved away. "Please," she said softly, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." The night of the showcase arrived with an electric atmosphere. The modern Edge Gallery had been transformed, its familiar spaces reimagined to accommodate the works of emerging artists. Jisoo's installation, despite Ji-yeon's attempts to relocate it, remained in the main gallery space after Mr. Park's firm insistence on maintaining the original layout. Jisoo's centerpiece dominated the far wall, a massive triptych that chronicled her journey from family rejection to artistic awakening. The left panel depicted a traditional Korean home dissolving into shadows. The middle panel showed a solitary figure navigating a maze of neon-lit streets, and the right panel revealed a burst of color and light emerging from darkness. The technical elements that Seoyeon had criticized were there, but they served the raw emotion of the piece rather than conforming to classical standards. The gallery filled with Seoul's art elite, their murmured conversations creating a steady hum beneath the ambient music. Seoyeon arrived early, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair drawing immediate attention. She made a show of examining Jisoo's work with a critical eye, her slight frown sending ripples of doubt through the gathering crowd. When Miho arrived, the energy in the room shifted. He moved through the space with purpose, stopping to greet guests, but clearly searching for someone. Ji-yeon intercepted him near the entrance, wearing an elegant black dress that seemed designed to remind him of their shared past. But Miho's attention remained divided, his eyes scanning the room. The formal presentations began with Mr. Park's introduction. Each featured artist would speak briefly about their work, leading to the moment Jisoo had both dreaded and anticipated. As she stepped forward to address the crowd, a subtle movement caught her eye, Seoyeon whispering something to a prominent critic, both of them smirking. But before doubt could take root, Miho stepped onto the small platform. His presence beside her wasn't planned, but his voice carried authority as he began to speak. "Art, at its core, is about truth," he began, his eyes meeting Jisoo's briefly before turning to the audience. "Not the comfortable truths we tell ourselves, but the raw, uncomfortable truths that challenge our assumptions." He gestured to Jisoo's triptych. What you see before you isn't just paint on canvas. It's courage made visible. It's the story of someone who chose authenticity over acceptance, passion over security. His words seemed directed not just at the audience, but at Jiyeon, at Seoyeon, at everyone who had doubted. Seoyeon moved forward, her face tight, with barely controlled anger. "This is highly irregular," she announced loudly. "The showcase's protocols, standards that have become chains," Miho interrupted, his voice firm. "Standards that serve to exclude rather than elevate." He turned to face Seoyeon directly. "When did we decide that art must conform to be valuable? When did we begin to value pedigree over passion?" The tension in the room was palpable. Jiyeon watched from the sidelines, her composed expression slipping as she realized the significance of the moment. This wasn't just about art, it was about breaking free from prescribed paths and expected outcomes. A commotion near the back of the gallery drew everyone's attention. One of the gallery assistants had bumped into the display lighting, causing it to shift. The new angle cast Jisoo's triptych in unexpected shadows, revealing layers of detail previously hidden. The crowd gasped collectively as the interplay of light and shadow transformed the piece, adding depth and dimension that even Jisoo hadn't fully anticipated. The unexpected revelation of Jisoo's artwork created a ripple effect through the gallery. The newly exposed layers in her triptych revealed intricate details, traditional Korean patterns woven into modern cityscapes, hidden symbols of growth and transformation, and subtle references to famous works that demonstrated her deep understanding of art history despite her lack of formal training. Seoyeon pushed through the crowd, her composure cracking as she confronted Jisoo directly. "This is exactly what I warned about," she declared, her voice sharp with frustration. "Amateur techniques masquerading as innovation. The lighting malfunction only emphasizes the flaws in your work." But the audience had already begun to see what Seoyeon refused to acknowledge. Art critics pulled out their phones, photographing the unexpected interplay of light and shadow. Several collectors huddled together, discussing potential acquisitions. The energy in the room had shifted decisively. Miho stepped forward, to defend Jisoo again, but she raised her hand, stopping him. For the first time since the evening began, Jisoo felt complete clarity about her place in this world. She turned to face Seoyeon, her voice steady and clear. "Art isn't about perfection," Jisoo stated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's about truth. Every flaw you see in my work represents a moment of genuine expression. Every amateur technique reflects a choice to prioritize emotion over convention. I didn't have the privilege of formal training, but I had something perhaps more valuable: the freedom to develop my own voice." The gallery fell silent as Jisoo continued, her words carrying the weight of every struggle she'd endured. "You see imperfection because you're looking for it. Others see authenticity because they're open to it. That's the real difference between us." Jiyeon, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward. Her expression had changed from its usual calculated poise to something more complex. "She's right," she said, surprising everyone. "We've become so focused on maintaining appearances, following prescribed paths, that we've forgotten what it means to be truly authentic." She turned to Miho, her voice softer. "That's why you left me in Paris, isn't it? Because I chose the safe path, the expected route." The revelation hung in the air, contextualizing the tension that had been building for weeks. Seoyeon's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. This entire showcase has become a mockery of professional standards." She gestured to several prominent gallery owners in the crowd. "Surely you can't endorse this amateur hour?" But her words had lost their power. The crowd had already been captured by the raw honesty of Jisoo's work and words. One of the gallery owners stepped forward, addressing Seoyeon directly. "Sometimes," he said, "the most powerful art comes from those who haven't been taught what they can't do." In this moment of confrontation, several truths emerged simultaneously. Seoyeon's attempts to maintain control through intimidation began to crumble. Jiyeon's presence in Miho's life revealed itself as an echo of past expectations rather than a promise of future happiness. And Jisoo, standing amid the storm she had unknowingly created, finally understood that her greatest strength lay in what others had seen as weaknesses, her unconventional path, her raw emotion, her willingness to break rules she had never been taught. The unexpected revelation during the showcase proved to be merely the beginning of the evening's transformative events. As the crowd continued to examine Jisoo's work under the altered lighting, a minor accident near her triptych created an even more dramatic moment of discovery. One of the panels shifted slightly, revealing an underlying layer of her artwork that had been intentionally concealed. Beneath the visible surface, Jisoo had created an intricate network of interconnected stories, scenes from her life, moments of struggle and triumph, all woven together with traditional Korean art techniques she had taught herself by studying ancient scrolls in the library. The exposed layer showed a detailed rendering of her family's home, but with a crucial difference. Instead of dissolving into shadows as in the visible version, this version showed the house transforming into a bridge, connecting the traditional world she had left behind with the contemporary art world she now inhabited. Miho was the first to understand the full significance. "This isn't just a painting," he announced to the gathered crowd. "It's a dialogue between tradition and innovation, between rejection and acceptance. Every layer tells a different part of the same story." His voice carried both professional authority and personal emotion as he spoke. Jiyeon stepped closer to examine the revealed layer, her expression softening with recognition. "The technique here," she said, pointing to a particularly intricate section, "it's similar to what we saw in that small gallery in Montmartre." She turned to Miho, understanding dawning in her eyes. "This is what you were trying to tell me back then, wasn't it? About art that speaks truth regardless of its origins." The revelation struck Seoyeon particularly hard. As she studied the newly exposed layers, her carefully maintained facade began to crack. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached toward the painting, stopping just short of touching it. "The integration of traditional techniques," she admitted reluctantly, "it's masterful." The words seemed to cost her considerable effort. The accident had knocked one of Jisoo's smaller pieces from its display, and as gallery staff rushed to retrieve it, they discovered something else. Hidden on the back of the canvas was a message written in elegant Hangul. "To my family, who taught me the value of tradition, even as I chose to break it. Your rejection became my foundation." This personal touch, never meant to be seen, resonated deeply with the audience. It transformed the evening from a simple art showcase into something more profound, a moment of collective understanding about the cost and reward of choosing one's own path. Miho, who had been watching Jisoo's reaction to these events, finally made his choice clear. He stepped away from Jiyeon definitively, moving to stand beside Jisoo. "Your art changed how I see the world," he said softly, though his words carried in the quiet gallery. "You showed me that true strength isn't in maintaining appearances or meeting expectations. It's in having the courage to be authentically yourself." The evening concluded with an unexpected announcement from Mr. Park. The gallery would be establishing a new program for self-taught artists, with Jisoo as its first resident mentor. The initiative would bridge the gap between traditional art education and innovative new voices in the field. As the crowd began to disperse, Seoyeon approached Jisoo one last time. Instead of criticism, she offered a card with contact information for several prominent collectors. "Your technique may be unconventional," she said stiffly, "but your vision is undeniable." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and sometimes that's where real change begins. The story that began with rejection ended with acceptance, not just of Jisoo's art, but of the idea that true artistic expression knows no boundaries of class, education, or tradition. As Miho and Jisoo stood together in the empty gallery later that night, surrounded by the physical manifestation of her journey, they understood that some connections, like great art, transcend the conventional paths that society lays out for us. The end of the showcase marked not just the conclusion of one chapter, but the beginning of many others. It proved that sometimes the most unexpected connections lead to the most meaningful transformations, and that authenticity, despite its cost, remains the most powerful form of expression.